Hey, what's up guys, Crazy here, back into Final Fantasy VII Remake, and today let's go over an advanced combat guide for Cloud. In this video I want to go over a deep dive into one of the best builds that you can get for Cloud, which is of course his melee build, and with this you're going to be able to pretty much destroy everything. You're going to be using a ton of counterattacks, counter stances to pretty much abuse the enemy's attacks and revert all of them back to him. But this is not going to be the only thing that I'm going to cover in this video. It's going to cover everything from the weapons, the items, the best materia, as well as a few tips and tricks that you're gonna probably need to know in order to make the most out of it. So if you enjoyed this video, as always, a thumbs up on it would be super awesome, and let's jump right into it. Obviously, it also goes without saying that you should reach 100% proficiency with all of these weapons, since you're going to utilize many of these abilities over here with many of these builds. But let's get started with, of course, the melee build, and also my favorite, using the hard edge sword. You're gonna be able to get the hard edge in chapter 9 wall market from one of the vendors for about 2000 gil, so by that point you're gonna definitely be able to afford it. But if you haven't reached that point yet, you can definitely make use of the Buster Sword and only invest your points into attack bonus and not magic damage, unless you're planning to go with a more hybrid build. So hard edge is by far the best choice over there for the melee build. The reason is obvious. It has by far the highest bonus to, of course, regular melee attacks, 137 at the maximum. As far as investing points into its skill tree, you're definitely going to want to prioritize those attack damage bonuses and not go for anything that gives you magic damage, since you're not going to be running a hybrid build with this type of sword. Otherwise, there's two other very good passives over here that are extremely useful. Stagger Siphon and Bloodsucker are the two best passives a sword can have. So whenever you defeat an enemy, Bloodsucker is going to give you about 450 to 500 heal back for each enemy defeated, which against huge groups is amazing to bring you back at max HP. Meanwhile, the Stagger Siphon is all around amazing to use against staggered foes, because if you use special attacks against staggered foes, this is again going to further heal you. Anyway, with this being said and done, let's go over the abilities that you'll be using the most with this build, and for this you're going to want to go into the battle settings and definitely pay close attention to these shortcuts. Let's start with Infinity's End. This is something that you learn by reaching 100% proficiency with the hard edge, and it's by far your biggest nuke with this build. In fact, it's the only ability you have in your arsenal that consumes 2 ATB points, but it also deals the highest amount of damage in the game, which is the maximum of 9,999. Very few abilities, even spells, can reach that amount of damage. The second one is gonna be the focused thrust that Cloud comes with by default since level 1, and this is amazing at both dealing a ton of damage as well as increasing that stagger meter by a ton. The third one is the triple slash that you learn by reaching 100% proficiency with the Iron Blade, and by far the one ability that you're always going to start combat with. It basically deals a huge amount of damage, it builds a ton of stagger meter, and it's also amazing at tracking enemies that might dodge all over the place. The fourth one is going to be the notorious counter stance. This shouldn't miss any build at any given point. You learn this from using the Twin Stinger sword, and this acts in so many ways as an amazing damage dealer, damage prevention, stagger prevention, and even animation cancelling. As in, during certain animations you can immediately use the counter stance, cancel that animation, and better prepare for an incoming attack. So all around amazing ability to have. Finally, you're also going to want to get the Ascension, which is pretty much the level 2 version of the Limit Break, Cross Slash, a much more powerful version that deals a ton more damage, and all of that damage, since it's all melee, is going to stack with all of the melee bonuses that you already have with this build. Now let's go over the materia build that I have over here. Of course, this can be a subject to change, but the few ones that I recommend having on almost all of the builds are, of course, the first strike materia that lets you start the battle with a full ATB gauge, and a steadfast block materia that blocks a ton of incoming damage as well as increasing your ATB boost when blocking. So these two together will provide a ton of ATB that you're gonna be able to use immediately against the enemy. Another one that is also extremely useful is the ATB stagger. So this gives you a large ATB boost on staggering foe with the 3-star, so again something useful that lets you immediately cast an ability as soon as you stagger an enemy. Furthermore, if you're playing on the hard difficulty, it goes without saying that 2 of these slots should be always dedicated to a maximum HP up materia to reach almost 10,000 HP. This is an absolute must against even the harder bosses that can one-shot your entire team. From this point on, I've recommended in the previous video having something like the HP absorption materia with the deadly dodge, since both of these can combine with each other. So what this means is that whenever you're doing a dodge followed by an immediate attack, which causes this deadly dodge attack, this is going to deal healing to your HP. So that's basically about 250 healing for each enemy that you hit. And remember that we talked about that stagger siphon as well as the bloodsucker passives in the hard edge. Yeah, these all 3 combined will make you pretty much a lich, so you can leech all of that HP from the enemy and keep yourself alive without ever having to heal yourself. Another very good early on combination is between elemental materia and either fire, ice, wind or lightning, and you can use this pretty much either on your weapon to imbue its attacks with that type of elemental as a bonus damage attack, or otherwise you can also put this on your armor, which is going to provide you damage absorption, even healing depending on its level, if you of course absorb a certain type of elemental. So like going up against a moth unit that deals lightning damage, you can combine this with the lightning materia and absorb all of those lightning attacks, even heal yourself and never be staggered by them again. Now if you've been following the same build as I am, chances are that you have 1 more materia slot left, and there's a few possibilities here to go with. If for example you're not finding yourself surviving enough, you can definitely pick a chakra materia. If you want to provide a bit of support in case your other team members might die, you can go with a revival materia. The luck up materia is also very useful since it provides a ton of bonus to luck, which increases your critical hit chance, and otherwise also going with haste might be a good idea. The time materia will provide that, and this is going to give you more ATB recharge rate, though I will say that these 2 materia are more suited for somebody like Tifa, where you're going to want to probably spam her attacks way more often. Now let's go over some really awesome combat tips to make things way better for yourself. First of all, let's take a look at the Punisher mode. Now there is a really nice gap closer that Punisher mode has that is really underutilized by most players. So if there's an enemy that's too far away from you but you're still in the Punisher mode that normally makes you move really slow, you don't actually need to switch stances. You can simply press the square button and Cloud is going to do a jump attack that's gonna close that gap. The benefit of using this is that it can take enemies by surprise. It is pretty much instant compared to moving towards them, and it also deals quite a lot of damage as well as pressure to increase that stagger meter. Moving on next, let's talk about building that stagger in the shortest amount of time possible. The 2 best abilities to do that is the triple slash and the thrust, in that order. So at the beginning of the fight, if you're only fighting against 1 enemy or even against many enemies, triple slash should be the first thing that you're using. Doing and landing all of the 3 slashes on the same enemy means that they're going to immediately put it under pressure, assuming that all 3 of them land. So this is actually better to use at first compared even to the thrust. After the enemy has been put under pressure, then you can cast your thrust, which is going to increase that stagger meter by a huge amount. So this can pretty much mean that in just 2 abilities you can completely stagger a foe, but against bosses it's a whole nother thing where you're going to have to spam that triple slash way more often. This brings us to Cloud's attack animations and the way you can cancel them. So there are 5 attack animations corresponding to the 5 attacks that Cloud does when using the square attack. So the first attack is a sword slash from left to right, followed by the second attack, which is the opposite, a slash from right to left. The third one is an overhead slash with a pretty long animation but also higher damage. The fourth one is an upward slash that's also pretty easy to break out of since the animation is pretty short, and it also lets you kinda transition into a different one. And finally we have the spin with the fifth attack that's also very long animation and deals the highest amount of damage. So between these attacks 1, 2 and 4 are the easiest to break out of, as well as the easiest to cancel their animation. Meanwhile, attack 3 and 5 are the hardest to break off since they have the longest animations and there are only a few abilities that can cancel those animations. You're going to want to use the counter stance since this is one of the few abilities that Cloud has that does break and cancel animations. In fact, counter stance can pretty much even cancel the short animations that attacks 1, 2 and 4 already have. So if you're seeing an attack incoming but you're in the middle of an attack sequence, immediately start using that counter stance. Of course, quick binded counter stance, as I've mentioned in the beginning of the video, and this is gonna be able to put you in that counter attack stance that gonna mitigate all the damage and return it back to the enemy, as well as provide some stagger. This of course brings us to the final point, which is that amazing sequence you probably saw in the beginning of the video where I continuously counterattack an enemy multiple times, seemingly without ever using any abilities. Well, here is what I actually did. So I've basically used a sequence following this. I've used counter stance followed by counterattack followed by another stance, and there's the option to actually do another counterattack after the second counter stance. So in this case, the moth unit is probably the best example since she can do damage even when staggered because of those blades in the middle that continue spinning and deal damage to you. So in this case, as soon as I saw her doing an attack on me, I immediately entered the counter stance. This countered the attack, and from that point on, once that was over, I immediately pressed triangle to enter the Punisher stance. This is what causes Cloud to automatically counterattack an attack. Not only does it do that, as well as preventing stagger and minimizes damage, but it also further builds your ATB gauge, which led me to cast another counter stance to counter those attacks again, and at one point I believe that I was able to cast a second counterattack with a fourth ability in the sequence. So this was all around amazing. As you can see, the results speak for themselves. The moth unit was about 65 to 70% HP, meanwhile I barely lost a few hundreds HP over there from attacks that could otherwise pretty much kill me, or at the very least bring me to under half HP. Anyway, the only two items outside of the weapon that I'm going to mention in this video are of course the chain bangle, probably the best armor in the game. You get this really late in chapter 17 from one of the chests, the second time you deal with some of Hojo's minions, and yeah, it both provides high defense as well as 4 materia slots, which are super useful. And outside of this, I'm also going to cover the Whistlewind Scarf, which is an all-around underrated item. It provides ATB gauge at the start of the fight, which couples really well with the first strike materia to give you oftentimes 2 ATB gauges at the very start of each fight, which is an immense advantage to have when you start a fight, since you're gonna be able to spam multiple abilities that are also very strong. There's many more on top of these that could work really well, but I've already covered that in a previous video, so go ahead and check that one out if you want a full breakdown. Nonetheless, this is it. There's many more builds planned to come along the way, so stay tuned for more. I'm planning more for Tifa, for Aerith, for Barret as well, and team combinations as well, which are gonna be really damn wild. So I'm gonna see you guys in just a little bit. As always, if you enjoyed this video, a thumbs up on it would be super awesome. Don't forget to subscribe and activate that notification bell, and I will see you guys in the next one.